Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. You probably hadn't heard of Andrew Yang 4 years ago, and then out of nowhere, he announced for president of the United States and became remarkably popular for a time. He didn't win, but he went on to run for mayor of New York City. He didn't win there either, but he made a splash in the process. And the one thing we learned about Andrew Yang, as often as we disagreed with him, was this was one of the very few people running for office who is interesting, who has his own ideas, who's thinking about the world and what it ought to look like going forward. He's put a lot of those thoughts in a new book. It's called Forward Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. We are happy to have Andrew Yang in our studio today. Andrew Yang, thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tucker. It's great to be here.
So you just came off this kind of, well, let me just start at the beginning, this whirlwind where you announced for president and for the mayor of our biggest city. And so you just had this incredibly intense series of experiences.
It's been a strange few years,
yeah.
yes. I have
a little shell shock. So typically people announce for president of the United States after a long career of chicken dinners, ascending the ladder in some sort of linear way, office to office to office to office. Joe Biden did this. You did not do this. Why did you decide you wanted to run for president, and what gave you the impression that you could win?
I worked in technology and entrepreneurship for over a decade, both as an executive and founder, and then as the CEO of a nonprofit I'd started, Venture for America. And that work took me to Michigan, Ohio, Alabama, Louisiana, Missouri, and I was convinced that we were undergoing the greatest economic transformation in our country's history, and it was upending the labor market. And our political class really either didn't understand it or didn't want anything to do with it. So I decided to run for president because I wanted to advance what I saw as real solutions, like a universal basic income that would help millions of Americans transition. It was an act of service on my part. I thought I could make a contribution.
So what's interesting is you came on our show in the spring of 2019 to talk about that, and there was a big overlap between your views on this and the views that we were espousing on the show at the time about, what do you do when
the robots can freaking do a lot of the work?
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, totally.
So then you run for president, you run for mayor, which is a different thing because you're running a city, right? If you win, but that message, which was really about economics and the value of labor versus the value of capital, kind of receded. Nobody really wanted to talk about that, I've noticed. Why?
Well, it didn't fit the political narratives or the media narratives of the day, and it certainly didn't seem very ideological. And that's one of the things that I learned, Tucker, is that I'm a business guy, an economics guy, a technology guy, and so to me it's straightforward. You lose 4 million manufacturing jobs to a combination of technology and globalization. It's going to devastate many communities. That's not ideological. That's just practical.
Right.
That's reality. But for whatever reason,
that's an undisputed fact, right?
Yeah, it's undisputed fact. I mean, you could try and parse out exactly why the 4 million manufacturing jobs were eliminated. You could say it was more globalization or more automation, but it's indisputable, and the ratio, is in some ways secondary. But it turns out that a lot of people weren't that deeply interested in facts and figures around economics, which was a mild surprise to me. I kind of thought that was what we were supposed to be talking about. But we did animate a number of primary voters in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and around the country. And I'm really grateful to them because I think we've helped our country understand what's happening to us.
There's no national conversation about this still, with respect. I mean, despite, I think, your best efforts, I don't agree with all of your solutions, but I love the fact that you're trying to force that conversation on the country because it's a central one. Why do you think we keep evading that debate?
You're right that we're still not paying enough attention to this.
Yes.
But with COVID, a lot of the arguments I was making essentially materialized in front of our eyes, where you saw Tyson Foods bring in robots in their chicken processing plants. You saw Walmart bring in robot janitors. And this human contact that people were arguing, saying, oh, people love being around other people. Now, obviously, that argument's out the window because businesses will say, not only does it make business sense for us to automate your jobs, but it's also supposedly better for health. And when I was running early on, Tucker, I had a very hard time convincing people that the robots are taking our jobs, that AI is going to eliminate millions of jobs. But now a majority of Americans agree with that argument. So we're still not talking about it enough, but more people are waking up to the fact that it's happening.
So why are we allowing this? I mean, it sounds like by your telling, and I agree with this, that COVID accelerated trends already in progress.
Yes.
Particularly toward automation.
Yep.
And we all agree that that is going to hurt people. So why do we stand back passively and allow this to progress?
Right now we have a system where big companies are mostly concerned with their bottom line. And so if they can eliminate lots of jobs and save money by adopting automation, right now we're essentially cheerleading them, clapping and saying, great, it's going to be good for your stock price. And a lot of corporate leaders are in these unfortunate positions where they kind of have to dissemble about the impact on their workers. They'll say, don't worry about it. We're going to retrain these workers for something else. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, like, I guess it'll be fine. When really, if you sit with these leaders, they'll be like, yeah, maybe we'll be able to find something new for them to do. Maybe we won't. So when you ask why are we allowing it, right now we have a system of corporate incentives that lead very strongly towards trying to do things as efficiently as possible. And then the other side of the ledger, I'm not sure what the incentive is.
Give us a sense of the scale of this. So the problems that you described, 2017, 18, 19, have gotten much worse, much more profound anyway. If this continues, say, for the next 10 years, how many unemployed, useless, directionless, working-age Americans are we looking at here?
It's definitely in the millions and possibly even into the tens of millions. And if you look at the composition of our labor market, most common jobs in the country are retail and sales, truck driver, information processor, food service and food prep. And a lot of these are the jobs that we're already seeing get eliminated. And by the way, now we're going to be investing more and more in trying to make those jobs extraneous. So you're looking at easily millions of jobs, possibly more than 10 million.
How volatile is a country that has 10 million unemployed young men?
It's extraordinarily volatile. And one of the things that I say in my last book, The War on Normal People, aptly named, is that if you have a group of people that don't have employment, particularly if they're men, antisocial behaviors surge. You see more gambling, more substance abuse, more crime, more self-destruction.
More mental illness.
More mental illness, for sure.
So we're seeing that now.
Yeah, we're living that very much so.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution first is to own up to the problem. And this is one of the frustrations I had on the presidential trail, is that if you argue that this case, somehow someone makes it ideological. And again, there's nothing ideological about the fact that my friends are working on technology that's going to be able to do the work of call center workers. There are 2 million call center workers right now. So we have to acknowledge the problem, and then we have to invest in trying to create new touch points for, in particular, millions of men to have other roles in the economy that are fulfilling, will give them purpose, structure, meaning, and also hopefully drive value. So one example would be, for example, an infrastructure bill. If you can employ hundreds of thousands of people rebuilding our crumbling highways or schools or railways, I mean, that's a good move. And then you should think in those terms over and over again. Because if you look at the numbers, our labor force participation rate, which is the ratio of people that are in the labor market, was at multi-decade lows pre-COVID, has sunk further down, and every 1/10 of a percentage point in the labor force participation rate translates to hundreds of thousands of unemployed people, but unemployed men. And then that results in higher crime, mental illness, substance abuse, depression, and on and on.
Here's what I don't understand. So I know you're not allowed to question immigration in any way, but not all immigration is the same. So you're describing an economy where people who work with their minds have a much brighter future than people who work with their hands. I think we can agree on that. So if you're importing to the tune of over 1 million a year, people who, at least this generation of those people, will be working with their hands because of their education levels, what the hell are they going to do, and why would you do that at exactly the moment that we're automating everything? I mean, I know it's hard to address this because people inject race into it. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with labor. So, what's the answer?
There's this whole rung of opportunities in the economy that Americans don't want to do. And those jobs right now are being filled by immigrants. And you can see that up and down the agricultural industry for sure. Where I live in New York City, there are a lot of delivery jobs and chef jobs and a bunch of other jobs that are being filled by immigrants right now.
For sure.
So there's this whole rung of opportunities. Now, what's the right number? What's the right balance? I think that you'd have to do a lot more work to figure out whether we're getting it right.
I don't hear anybody even thinking about the calculation. I don't hear a single person. I mean, the objections that people have to immigration are mostly cultural. We could argue whether those are legitimate. I have those reservations, I'll be honest. But my main reservations are economic. So I don't hear many attacks on our immigration system from the right from an economic perspective. Like, what are these people going to do? Will this make us richer or poorer? And I don't even hear this conversation taking place at all on the pro-immigration side. So, like, why?
Well, I'm the son of immigrants myself, and my father got his PhD in physics from Berkeley and generated 69 U.S. patents for GE and IBM.
Yeah.
So there's a class of immigrants that I think are awesome for the country, and
yes.
Hopefully will end up driving a ton of value. And I remember when I was talking about this on the Democratic debate stage, and I said something to that effect, and then someone said, "Hey, Andrew, FYI, like, your parents aren't the typical immigrants we're talking about." So I think it is a question that we should, again, try and take ideology out of, is that a modern country should have policies on immigration that are trying to enhance our overall well-being. There's a human rights perspective that I certainly appreciate a great deal, because people want better lives, and immigrants do end up adding economic value in most cases after a generation or two. But you have to have practical approaches that try and balance a number of concerns at the same time.
Well, why wouldn't, so if someone says, Andrew Yang, your parents are not typical immigrants, first of all, who would dare say that to you? But leaving that aside, why wouldn't we say, okay, if Andrew Yang's parents added 69 new patents, that's a good thing. Well, so why wouldn't we try and figure out how to get more Andrew Yang's parents to come here?
I think we should. One of the things that the U.S. has benefited from for generations is that we were a beacon for the rest of the country, and we absorbed a lot of the human and intellectual capital that ended up driving a ton of value, not just in terms of patents, but like in every field you can think of. And we're losing that, really. There are a lot of people around the world now that don't think that the U.S. is the land of opportunity.
Even as our immigration levels rise to their, I think this year will be the highest level ever. So even as we get more immigration, we're less thoughtful about how we sort that and less interested in its effect on us, which is to say the people whose country it is. Like, what is that?
And that's something I'd love to help turn around, where I do know people who in past years 100% would be trying to start their companies here in the U.S. And by the way, that would end up creating jobs and value and wealth and the rest of it, who are instead starting them in other parts of the world.
Why?
Because they think they have a better combination of environment, competitiveness, support, access to talent. Maybe they themselves are not American, and it's hard for them to come here and set up shop here. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. But I have.
But I mean, this is important. This is an important question. I mean, this is your world. You know, people who are literally going to Singapore or whatever rather than here. Where are they going, by the way?
Well, they're staying in China. They're staying in India. They're heading to Singapore and other parts of the world, Indonesia even. Like that, there are people who are making interesting choices.
If someone has decided, someone with options, I'd rather go to Indonesia than San Francisco. You have to ask, what is it about San Francisco that they're avoiding, intentionally avoiding? What is it?
Right now, I mean, and I was
be honest, I won't tell anybody. I'm just interested.
Well, I mean, the people I'm thinking of, for them it is, hey, can I actually get a visa? Can I get a visa for all the people that I want to get a visa for? Can I recruit talent who's going to want to stay there at a rate that makes sense for my business? Am I going to be able to grow the business in a cost-efficient way? San Francisco, I think what you were driving at was a slightly different issue, which is what's going on in San Francisco, where I was this past week. And there are issues around livability in San Francisco.
Sure, and I mean, it could be Marin County, it could be the South Bay. I mean, anywhere in the Bay Area, but that's our technology capital. So, I mean, we have a much larger population than Indonesia. It's a much freer country. The standards of living in the United States are much higher still than Indonesia, much, much higher. So you just have to, and with all these people, you would think that we would have the human capital, as you put it, to staff a startup. But they're deciding they'd rather be in Indonesia. So, like, What do we need to fix to change that?
We need to make it easier for folks who want to start businesses to come here. First, it starts with going to school here, because a lot of these people used to come here for their degrees and get graduate degrees. And one thing I think is a no-brainer is that if you come to study here and get a degree or an advanced degree in particular, we should be stapling a green card to your diploma. Right now, there are far too many people who come to this country, get an advanced degree like my parents did, but don't stay here like my parents did. They go home. And then 5 years later, we're competing with the company that they started. That doesn't make any sense to me. They should be starting the company right here in the US.
Wait a second. So, but if there's you're saying that we don't have a very deep labor pool for sophisticated technology companies. I mean, we have a ton of people. We've issued more green cards than we've ever issued ever. And yet we don't have enough people to help grow a company. Like, what about our systems is broken?
We're not producing as many STEM grads and engineers as certain other countries. And then the engineers we do produce typically have higher wage requirements and other things. And so even if you were to start a successful tech company in San Francisco and the Bay Area, your preference probably would be to also start a tech development wing or outpost in another part of the world so you can access that talent. But that's a preferable arrangement to that company being based someplace else in the first place.
Yeah. So you've just described something pretty scary. So you're saying the manual jobs are going away because of automation.
Yes.
And now the knowledge-based jobs are going away because of labor costs.
There's some truth to that for sure, where we don't have the full suite of talent to help a lot of companies reach scale. And so a lot of companies, as soon as they do have that aspiration, do want to set up tech outposts in China, in India, and other parts of the world to access that engineering talent. That's the truth.
Does that worry you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's better than that company being headquartered in China and India in the first place. But we have a lot of problems, Tucker, and I think you and I agree on the general picture that we're automating away millions of jobs, and we're not being terribly honest about it. And a lot of Americans are looking up saying, like, what the heck happened to my middle class livelihood or the town that I grew up in, I want my kids to grow up in. All of a sudden, my kids are looking up and saying the population is shrinking and the opportunities aren't here. I mean, that's the picture. And that picture is manifesting in different ways in different parts of the economy. It's not necessarily the case that things are great for a certain class of workers that you might imagine in terms of white-collar, college-educated workers. They have their own set of issues. They're going to be much better off, though, than the manual workers whose jobs we're decimating.
So you became really famous for a bunch of reasons during the presidential campaign, but mostly for UBI, Universal Basic Income, the idea that the government is going to meet some threshold for you. Just give us, and I know this is well practiced because you've talked about this a ton. We have never talked about this. Give us your 2-minute pitch for why UBI is a good idea.
Universal basic income is a policy where everyone in a society, let's say the US of A, gets a certain amount of money to meet your basic needs, no questions asked. And this is not an Andrew Yang idea. This is a Thomas Paine idea, a Milton Friedman idea, a Martin Luther King idea. I ran on a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for every American when you turn 18, which I thought would be a foundation and help people make more effective transitions. But if we are going through this historic transformation, which we are, in my opinion, then we need to try and give people the ability to manage that transition and also participate in the value that's being generated. Because today you have trillion-dollar companies like Amazon paying zero in taxes, and then we're all looking around wondering what the heck is going on. We should make as many Americans as possible participants and shareholders in the value that's being generated in parts of the economy.
A couple of things really quick. Your point about Amazon not paying taxes is, I think, literally infuriating to people certainly it is to me when I hear that. Why not just fix that problem first?
Oh, we should. I was beating the drum about that on the presidential trail, and I remember you were right there with me being like, this is crazy.
Amazon pays no taxes?
Yeah, that Amazon pays no taxes. You'd be like, that makes zero sense.
It's the highest market cap in the world and it pays no taxes?
Yeah, it's infuriating. I agree.
So, and we'll get to UBI in just a second, but so when you said that, everyone goes, yeah, that's exactly right. you know, but why? I mean, that's fixable. We have a Congress which sets our tax policy. What kind of reaction did you get, without naming names, privately to that? Like, why isn't there a groundswell of support among political leaders to just, I don't know, make Amazon pay taxes? Why is that hard?
Well, it's a sign of the dysfunction in DC right now, where you have very, very obvious glaring problems, like the fact that Amazon pays no taxes, and then they can't come up with a solution. I proposed a solution that some people might have issues with, which is a value-added tax, because I thought that Amazon could not game its way out of that. It's essentially like a tax at the point of sale. But in my mind, it's just a sign of how broken Congress is, Tucker.
I mean, what do I know? I'm not an expert in tax policy, but it might just be easier to pass an Amazon tax.
Sure.
Where Amazon pays 15% of its net in taxes. Like, why not?
That would be,
I pay 50.
That would be pretty popular. It's true. It might have a better shot at passing if it was just called the Amazon tax.
Yeah. Okay, so to UBI, especially when you throw in the disparity between how Amazon is treated by our tax code and how your average wage earner is treated, you definitely get my sympathy. Here's the problem that I have with UBI, and I'd just be interested in your response to it. As a human matter, when you give people something they didn't earn, it's not good for them. And all of us have experienced this in one way or another.
Sound like a parent, Tucker. No, I'm kidding.
I'm a parent of 4, no. And I'm also someone who grew up around, people with inherited money. And I can't think of a single instance where it was good for them, not one. So that's not, of course, on the other side. You don't think of UBI as like some trust fund. It's a small amount. It's $12,000 a year.
Yep.
On the other hand, the principle remains. You went to Exeter, Phillips Exeter, in Exeter, New Hampshire, which is a famous boarding school and richest person in the world, and a great school. Congrats. But you've been around inherited money people, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Why is that not a problem?
Well, to me, the problem is at the other end, Tucker, where if someone's trying to get ahead and we've blasted away their factory or automated away their job, then at this point they're sinking into the dirt with the town in many ways, because we haven't left them much of a recourse. And in that circumstance, to me, $1,000 a month as a transition fund for them to get on their feet, maybe move to the next town or start their own business, or pool together the funds with other people and work on something they've always wanted to work on. To me, that's something that our government can do that would be effective and would make sense. And to your point about the fact that, look, $1,000 a month isn't going to cause anyone to run out and buy a Porsche or anything like that.
No, like, not going to marry your secretary on $1,000 a month.
That it's foundational and also would make people feel like they had actual value in terms of our citizenship, really. Like right now we're telling people they can vote. And then people are looking up being like, like for some reason my vote doesn't seem to be, like doesn't seem to have the same oomph that maybe, I was brought up to think that it had. When I ran companies, and I've run several companies, people can always tell whether you're investing in them. And so I would love to be able to look every American child in the eye and say, your country loves you, values you, and we will invest in you in your future.
How about improving the schools, which suck? I mean, they're embarrassing. Schools are terrible. Like, they're a joke, and everyone knows that. That's why everyone in my world sends his kids to private school. I think you actually send your kids to public school. But the point is, and congratulations, but most people I know send their kids to private school, especially if they live in cities, because the schools are just so bad, and we've really given up. Like, why wouldn't that be a good way to elevate the people who need it?
No, I love the idea of trying to make our schools better. Part of this, Tucker, is I'm an operator, an entrepreneur, and I have higher confidence in our ability to send people $1,000 a month and have them be able to do something positive and useful with it, than for me to stand up and say, I'm going to make everyone's schools better. Because that's like a politician thing that politicians have been saying for years and years. And if I said it, I could believe it, I could want it. But I might not be able to deliver on that in a time frame where I'm going to be able to help you and your family.
No, it's a complicated. I think that's an entirely fair point.
But I would be totally for trying to invest in our education in a way that would actually work and be impactful. And we've been grasping at that. One of the studies I saw that really had an impact on me was that and I have 2 kids, 9 and 6. One of them is special needs. That 2/3 of our kids' educational outcomes occur outside of school,
Right.
and that's number of words spoken to them when they're a baby, stress levels in the household, income of the
Yes.
neighborhood, and so these are variables that are outside of the school, and the teachers know it. If you go to any teacher and say, "Hey, what if I were to tell you that you can control approximately 1/3 of your students' educational outcomes?" They would be like, "Yeah, I think that's right," because they've taught dozens or hundreds of kids, and they
Right.
know that a lot of this stuff's happening outside of the school. So if you were a society and you wanted to help people learn, would you focus on the 1/3 or the 2/3, particularly when you think you could make a big difference to the 2/3, and the 1/3 you've been trying to make a difference for years, somewhat unsuccessfully? Not that I'd want to give up on it. I mean, we still need to try.
No, but I think it's a fair point. I mean, if the moms in a neighborhood want a good school, you'll have a good school. And if if the families are disorganized and people are totally distracted by just keeping everything together, you've got bad schools. I mean, that's true.
Well, so much of it is what goes on at home with the family. And it's one reason I'm so grateful to my wife, Evelyn, who's been at home with our boys
Yes.
over this last number of years. You know, you could have the best school in the world, but if the kids aren't getting what they need at home, you're not going to have the best outcome.
So you just ran for mayor of New York. You've got to still be in shock from that. It's the biggest city in the country. It's one of the most ferocious political races that we have. Under the best circumstances, the city's kind of right on the edge of insanity. I mean that with love, as someone who loves New York on some level. But, what was that like?
It was a lot, for sure, Tucker. I mean, the city's in tough shape and has been for a number of months. The race was very intense. We put out what I thought was a positive, practical message, got over 115,000 first-place votes, got more individual donors than any mayoral candidate in the history of New York City, which I'm very proud of. Came up short, and still just hoping that the city gets back on its feet as quickly as possible.
What do you think of ranked choice voting?
I am a huge ranked choice voting fan, and I will say to anyone listening to this, we're like, ranked choice, what? 95% of New Yorkers found it easy to use, and 77% want to do it again. So if you get 4 out of 5 New Yorkers want to do something again, it's pretty good. But it makes your votes more powerful because you can vote for more than one candidate in order of preference. And this way, no one can tell you, oh, you're going to waste your vote, because you're like, well, I'll vote for whoever I want. And if my first choice candidate doesn't make it to the top, then my vote will flow to the second choice candidate, or maybe even third.
New York City had a very tough time counting those ballots, I noticed.
Yeah, there's a process, and then there's the competence of the Board of Elections of New York City. Very excited about the merits and potential for ranked choice voting. Would not vouch for the Board of Elections.
So the moment, for those of us who don't live in New York, that kind of filtered out of the city to the rest of the country with you, came when you noted that New York has an actual homeless problem. It's completely real. And here's what you said. This was your controversial statement.
I had that experience countless times on the trail, Don, where I would say, hey, I'm running for president, to a truck driver, retail worker, waitress in a diner, and they would say, what party? And I'd say Democrat, and they would flinch, like I'd said something really negative, or I just had turned another color or something like that. And there's something deeply wrong when working class Americans have that response to a major party that theoretically is supposed to be fighting for them. So you have to ask yourself, what has the Democratic Party been standing for in their minds? And in their minds, the Democratic Party, unfortunately, has taken on this role of the coastal urban elites who are more concerned about policing various cultural issues than improving their way of life that has been declining for years.
Okay, so sometimes, as the host, you want to ask a question, but the control room in New York decides, no, we're going to go in another direction. This is an illustration of how I'm just a puppet of my producers at Fox News HQ. So they ran another soundbite that's you from November of 2020, making the point that the Democratic Party was the party of the working man, a phrase that's not even allowed anymore. And now it's something very, very different. So you said that, which is a completely fair thing to say. That trend that you described seems to have accelerated to me. It seems less the party of working people than it ever has been.
I was taken aback by just how negative a reaction the Democratic Party got among working class people that,
Yeah.
again, it's supposed to be fighting for. And I think this is a fundamental problem that I've been essentially begging the Democratic Party to try and get its arms around or make progress on. I spent months in Iowa and Ohio to a lesser extent, and these are states where Democrats were very competitive recently.
Oh, yeah.
And now they are much, much less competitive. And it's in large part because of what I described in that clip, where people don't associate the Democratic Party with real economic solutions that are going to make your life better. It's more around various cultural issues that aren't as core to people's way of life, in my opinion.
So I'm 52, so I've seen all of this change, and I've never been a Democrat, and I've always criticized them, probably in some ways unfairly looking back on it. My views have changed dramatically. But when I think of the Democratic Party in the fall of 2021, I think of a party that is run by and for a small group of affluent, unmarried, childless, white liberals in the city who don't have economic concerns, so they don't talk about economics, who are totally narcissistic, who only want to talk about themselves, i.e. their identities, and whatever, sexual interest they have. Like, completely disconnected from the concerns of anybody, and it's this group, young, affluent, white liberals in Williamsburg. That's my mental picture. There's no group I personally dislike more, I'll just be honest with you. But it does seem like their concerns have a disproportionate effect on the policies of the party.
It's one reason I enjoyed spending time in Iowa and Ohio and want to orient the Democratic Party toward the problems in those environments, because the problems you'll hear in those towns are very real and very different, around farmers committing suicide, and towns that are drying up. And that's where I think our energies and attention should be. I think it's one drawback of the media-driven nature of our narratives today is one, and the media tends to be, as you know, centered in particular areas and locations.
Yes, I've noticed that.
but it's also a relative weakness over the fact that we have these two supposedly big tent parties. They're supposed to encapsulate all of these different people and points of view, and then certain points of view just end up being much louder, really more because of, again, geography and mechanics than anything else. If you're someone who's plugged into the media networks and have very powerful social media tools in certain parts of the country, you're just going to have more of a megaphone.
That's the second time you've mentioned social media as a driver of our political culture.
Yep.
So tell, I mean, again, this is a world that you're familiar with. You were in tech. How do you think social media affect our political conversation?
It's terrible, genuinely. And one of the things that studies have shown is that negative and even untrue information spreads 6 times more powerfully and quickly on social media than fact. Fact is boring, and argument and invective are intoxicating. And so you have a lot of people who then respond to those incentives and end up trying to make themselves more popular by attacking other people. There's a constant desire to tear other folks down. So there's this constant churn on social media that doesn't really lead any place terribly productive, and makes people more polarized, more negative, less solutions oriented.
Sounds like it's wrecking the country to me.
As a parent, I'm very, very concerned because, you and I are old enough, Tucker, to have grown up at a time before social media, and then we were seeing our kids on social media. And empirically, it's not great for kids in particular. You're seeing record levels of depression among teenage girls. And if you're literally just oppressing your kids, like, what are we doing? And then
kind of. We don't let Philip Morris sell Marlboros to 8-year-olds. I think there's a lot of evidence your kids would be better off smoking Marlboros than going on Facebook and Instagram, and I mean that. So why do we allow this? Like, why shouldn't we haul those people by the nose before Congress and shut their companies down? I don't get it. As long as we're going to live in a fascist country, which clearly we do, we're putting people in prison for disagreeing, so why are we letting Facebook and Google wreck our kids?
I think the problem is that our government is just decades behind the curve. And so you have private companies doing what private companies do, which is they're going to maximize their own economic opportunities. And in a way, you can't be mad at them for that because, again, like that's where their incentives are. So the problem is we have legislators who have watched all of this come up to a point where now there are these world-changing juggernauts that are distorting our democracy or worse, and we don't have a handle on what we can do about it. So I think there's a middle ground, Tucker, I think you probably would agree, between shutting these companies down and letting them run amok. And we need to try and race to that middle ground as quickly as possible because we don't have unlimited time.
No, we really don't. So since you've been a candidate twice and been the subject of an awful lot of media coverage, how do you think social media affect political coverage?
Also not great. It ends up. So I came up as a nobody presidential candidate. So grateful to everyone who supported me and who gave me a platform, which includes you, Tucker. And I used social media to try and get my message out. And it was effective. And that message, I'm proud to say, was positive 99% of the time. Now, unfortunately, I think that social media ends up distorting our political coverage because of the incentives I described earlier, where you want to do something that's splashy and gets a lot of attention, which will push you toward the extremes. But also, it makes journalists get absorbed in the news cycle of the day that happens on Twitter. And I don't think that's good for our political discourse at all. I mean, if you look at the long-term problems we have around the automation of jobs or climate change or any of these big honking problems, it's not like something's going to pop up on Twitter today that's going to be like the game changer in those long-running challenges. So it's engendering this.
You don't think? I keep scrolling through my feed looking for the answer to life, and it hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, it hasn't come up for any of us yet. So it's enhancing kind of short-termism in our political discourse when we need to think much, much bigger.
Could you be a candidate for office without reading Twitter all the time?
And that's a great question. I believe you could in certain instances. There are a lot of local candidates that are very successful who aren't on social media because they just get out there and talk to people. Now, is that more feasible on a local scale than national? Yeah, it is. But a lot of action's local.
When you were running for president, how much time did you spend on social media? And be honest.
I spend a good deal of time on social media, in part because I was in a rental vehicle going from event to event in Iowa and New Hampshire. So what are you doing? You're on your phone being like, oh, let me send something out. Let me try and interact. It was just a way to do work, really. The things you can do in your vehicle when you're going between events in New Hampshire are either call people or you do social media. So I was on it a great deal.
Do you think it was good for you?
Was it good for my
Did you get
mental
home
health?
and your wife said, I think you're a better man for the time you spent on Twitter?
Well, I'm someone who's just trying to get stuff done. So it was a tool, but it helped me, Tucker, understand just how much it's messing a lot of people up.
Yeah.
Because I'm a full-grown adult with a wife and kids. And it messed me up sometimes. So if I were to get rewound to the point when I was like 18, 19, and it seemed like what everyone else thought of me was the most important thing in the world, it would completely screw me up. And I was a very shy, bookish kid when I was young, but at least when I went home, I could close the door and I'd be alone. Today, our kids are never alone. They close the door and then all their classmates are with them on their phone.
It's scary.
It's not great.
No, it's you're a man of understatement. I noticed that. I don't meet many of those.
Well, I'm a man of positivity. I'm all about solutions. I'm trying to, and that is one thing I do want to push, Tucker, is that at this point, a lot of us agree on the problems.
Right.
And then the question is, what can we actually enact and do that we actually could do? It's one reason why I focused on cash so much, again, because I'm more confident in our ability to send people cash than I am in our ability to do a lot of other things. And it's one reason why in my new book I talk about some things we can do, including around tech, to your point.
So I've always wondered, I always thought the most successful domestic program, or certainly one of them the United States ever pulled off, I'll admit it, was by FDR. It was the Civilian Conservation Program, the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, run by General MacArthur. It was the largest mobilization of Americans in peacetime in history. And they built the infrastructure of the national parks. And part of Washington, D.C., the GW Parkway, which is the prettiest road in the capital, was built by the CCC. And they employed unemployed young men between 18 and 25, I think, and sent, gave them a nominal wage, but gave them purpose, and they rebuilt America.
Yes.
So I think that's a wonderful thing. I know libertarians disagree, but look at its effects. And they built beautiful things.
I agree.
So why wouldn't we? I know the U.S. government is terrible at everything, but why not try something like that as opposed to just sending people checks?
I think this is a both-and situation, Tucker. I would love to create a 21st century of the Civilian Conservation Corps and employ people, for example, managing our forests, which right now, unfortunately, are becoming tinderboxes because of climate change, and it's resulting in devastation in different parts of the country, particularly out west. I think that we should be doing more to rebuild our country literally. I mean, we are falling apart. But there are needs in education that we can be filling at a higher level. We should be going on a massive talent recruitment drive for any young person who wants to be able to lend a hand. There should be absolutely no barrier between them doing so. And just if you raise your hand, we should be able to put you to work doing something really positive and productive. I agree.
So I want to play, we're going to try again to play your soundbite from the mayoral race. And you basically make the point that if you live in New York City, you shouldn't have to live in fear of being attacked by the mentally ill homeless. Here's what you said.
The fact is, mentally ill homeless men are changing the character of our neighborhoods. A woman my wife Ellen is friends with in her mom group in Hell's Kitchen was punched in the face by a mentally ill man. Sent a picture of her bruised face around the mom group, spread like wildfire. This is happening in New York City, and we're not talking enough about it. Families are leaving as a result. In East Harlem, the neighborhood has been changed. Upper West Side, the neighborhood has been changed. We owe our people and our families better than this, and I'm frustrated by the political nature of these responses. I mean, we're not talking about housing affordability. We're talking about the hundreds of mentally ill people we all see around us every day on the streets and the subways. We need to get them off of our streets and our subways into a better environment. And when you ask what I'm going to do differently, I'm going to rebuild the stock of psych beds in our city. There will be no recovery until we resolve this. I will fix this, New York.
Damn, that was good. I texted you right after. I was thrilled to see that. And again, I didn't think there was an ideological point. It's just like, you're the one guy noting the obvious. If you live in New York, this is a huge part of your life. Why did nobody else say this?
I'm genuinely not sure, because I saw this with my family and the families around us in our part of the city. And by the way, it's still very much a reality.
I know.
Like my mother is afraid to walk out of a certain number of blocks from her apartment for the same reason. So there's a lot of work to be done. Again, you're right. I don't see this as terribly ideological. I see this as like a very core lived experience for, unfortunately, too many people in New York City right now. And a lot of them are voting with their feet.
And by the way, for the mentally ill homeless, I'm not sure how we're serving their needs. So when you
100%.
said this, people said, oh, Andrew Yang hates the homeless. Well, how are we serving people with severe psychiatric conditions by letting them live on the street? I don't understand.
I completely agree. I believe I led with that in that statement. And then for whatever reason, people ignored the fact that I wanted to help the people who are struggling with mental illness into better situations. The street's no place to get well.
When you said that, I think that was the most animated I saw you. I didn't watch every second of the campaign, but I paid attention because it's our biggest city and it matters, and it was an interesting campaign. What kind of, you were savage for saying that by groups that have, taking a vig from homeless policy and from ideologues, they hated it. But like, how did other people respond to that?
A number of people on the street came to me and said, thank you, thank you for saying what was on our minds. I did get that a number of times on the streets in New York.
Are you going to stay in New York?
Well, my kids are in school there, and
that's not much of an endorsement.
We love. Well, you didn't let me finish the sentence.
Oh, sorry.
I was like, my kids are at school there, and we love it, and I have many friends and family there. So we'll be there trying to make things better in our own way.
So, I just can't overstate this, went from national anonymity a lot of friends, coworkers, but not a national presence.
Like popular guy, and like
Yeah,
the local...
to running for president, having your own kind of internet cult, the Yang Gang around you. Did you ever get them to like paint your house or do anything?
Gosh, no, Tucker. That's so...
I wonder, like, what? I wonder what it would be like to have your own, group of acolytes as you did. But anyway, that was,
again, super grateful to everyone who supported my campaign to try and...
So that was your first moment in politics, was as a presidential candidate. Then you ran again for mayor of our biggest city. So you're probably not going to recede into anonymity again, I wouldn't think. As James Carville once said to me, the thing about running for office is it's kind of like having sex. Once you do it, you kind of want to do it again. So I think that's true. What are you running for next?
I am trying to bring our country back together. And we can see that polarization is getting worse and worse because of the media and social media and political incentives you and I talked about, and I talk about in my book, Forward. So I am starting a new popular, inclusive movement that's going to welcome independents, Democrats, and Republicans alike to advance real electoral reform and solutions that are going to give rise, hopefully, to a middle ground in American politics and a greater diversity of points of view. Because right now, this duopoly is not working for any of us. It's not working for Democrats, Republicans, or independents. And so this is my new project, the Forward Party. Not left or right, but forward.
So that's a third party.
It is a third party, yes, though it's starting out as a PAC because you don't actually become a political party on day one. You have to do a bunch of stuff.
Well, sure. I mean, systems... Ted Kaczynski, I have to say, has written very convincingly on this, the Unabomber. Bad person, but a smart analysis, I think, of the way systems work. And his argument is that large organizations over time morph into purely self-preservation projects. Like a big system in the end protects itself, and that's kind of all it does. So our two-party system is certainly in that category. There are so many barriers to starting a viable third party. It hasn't been done. Why can you do it?
I'd love to go into the history and background a bit, which you probably know better than I do. But if you look at the Constitution, there's nothing about political parties, or otherwise. And if you look at the writings of the Founding Fathers, they feared factionalism that didn't fluctuate, which is exactly what we have with this duopoly. If they were to wake up and see what was happening now, they would be shocked and horrified. And when you look at Americans around the country, 57% at this point want a third party. 60% think both parties are out of touch. If you were an entrepreneur, as I am, if you arrived on a market and said, hey, there's this dysfunctional duopoly and over half of people want a new alternative, you'd say, oh, let me create a new alternative. The problem is what you just described, Tucker, is that it is now structurally nearly impossible to create a new alternative. So it's sort of an irresistible force and an immovable object.
Yes, though I think it could be done. It seems to me the pressure is going to come from the lifestyle liberals from the group in Williamsburg, because they're the ones who mean it the most. Their whole identity is wrapped up in this weird evangelical religion they have. And so I wonder, like, the second a third party is, forces people to buy into like radical trans ideology or whatever, like, you can change your sex by saying so. That's insane. Of course, it's not science. But like, if that's a tough place for you because you have to take a stand on that issue. And the second you do, you alienate people. Like, you can't kind of get around that, can you? It's an acid test.
The Forward Party stands for a group of principles I think the vast majority of Americans will be excited about. And the first is open primaries and ranked choice voting to enable diverse points of view. So anyone who is sick of the duopoly, even if you aren't a huge Yang fan, you should be for the Forward Party just because we're going to actually change the process so that new parties can emerge. So that's number one. Number two is fact-based governance. We really should just be trying to measure what's actually happening on the ground as opposed to who's winning the argument of the day.
Don't we have to agree on what the facts are, though?
And that's one of the reasons I think the Forward Party is important, is because anyone who's a member of the Forward Party will say, look, we can try and agree on what the central facts are so we can have disciplined conversations and arguments instead of just shouting at each other. Again, this wants to be the middle ground for the country. effective and modern government, one of the big frustrations is what you just described, Tucker, is that just stuff's not working very well. And you can see when you're on your phone and you're banking, you're like, okay, my bank has their act together. And then when you interact with the government, sometimes it's a very different experience. And then when someone comes to the government and says, hey, we want to do this stuff, you're like, wait a minute, I'm not sure like you guys are actually up for what you're saying you want to be up for. So modernizing our government, making it more effective. Grace and tolerance, which is that we should be able to sit with anyone else, no matter their point of view, and have a reasonable discussion with them, and not
Yes.
have people attack you for saying, oh, you sat with someone who, you know, I disagree with on X and Y. How are we ever going to make progress as a country if we cannot sit with people we disagree with? Like what kind of strange path forward?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. That's why I'm sitting with you and you with me.
Yes.
But you will take, for the crime of sitting at a table with America's foremost white supremacist, you're going to take a lot of crap, obviously, for doing this interview. But you clearly don't care, I guess.
Well, again, you have to send a message that we're never going to make progress if we're not willing to talk to each other. And that's what the Forward Party is going to be about. I ran for president as a Democrat. I'm now an independent. I will talk to anyone who wants to actually make our lives better and solve the problems that are getting worse around us. We do not have unlimited time. This country is not doing well. You're a parent, I'm a parent. We have to try and make this country stronger and more whole for our next generation, or we will have failed them. I just see myself as a parent trying to do the right thing for my family, your family, every family in this country.
Where are you on the Bill of Rights, on the U.S. Bill of Rights?
Where
As a
am
lawyer.
I?
Yeah, I'm serious. I mean, does it have the meaning that it had when you were a kid? That your freedom to say what you think is absolute, your right to defend yourself is God-given and protected by the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can just go down through the whole list.
I am a huge believer in individual liberty and freedom as enumerated in the Bill of Rights. I think right now we're getting bogged down because there's this new public square in social media that is run by private companies. It's a recent invention. And I do think applying the First Amendment to what's happening on social media is a strange framework, because the First Amendment says the government will not abridge your ability to speak, and then we're treating Facebook like it's the government. And right now it obviously is not. So you would need to try and sit down, in my view, with government, social media companies, nonprofits, and media companies to try and hash out rules of the road. I think that's where you were driving with that question. I'm not sure if that was.
Yes, I mean, the whole American government is based on the Constitution, Bill of Rights being the most famous component of that, of course. And I rarely hear anybody seeking office say the point of this whole exercise is to preserve what makes America different, unique, really, in the world, and that's this set of rights that we believe we were born with and government exists to protect.
Well, so here's the thing, and you and I do disagree on this, I think, though we agree on other things or aspects of it, is that I want to be a realist about what the government can and can't do for us. And one of the things I do think we're overstating, and this is something I disagree, that you and I don't see eye to eye on, is that I think that we have these major problems coming that we're going to need to come together and solve, whether it's social media, climate change, like these things. And that collective action in some cases might impinge upon what someone thinks of as like an individual freedom. For example, let's say posting something on social media that other people find objectionable or hateful. This to me is something that we can come together and collectively solve for, and not just have it say like everyone can do whatever they want as long as it's in the communication realm. I do think that there should be some rules of the road again.
Well, there always have been.
Yeah, there always have been. Like it's never been legal to run into certain places and say certain things.
But the strike zone's been pretty wide since Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1967. I mean, I think the Supreme Court pretty much did. I don't think they did say freedom of speech applies to virtually everything except imminent exhortations to violence.
Yeah, and so this is the point I was trying to make, is that right now there is a concern that the government's going to squelch our ability to say certain things.
Right. There's a concern, yes. I would say
Yes.
there's a concern, yes.
Yes. And I think that right now we're in the midst of cacophony and chaos in the form of social media that's literally making our kids sad and depressed.
Yes.
And so if you look at these sets of problems, you say, okay, like which problem am I most concerned about right now? And not to say that addressing the mental illness problem would necessarily like impinge upon one's individual expression. Like ideally it does not. But we're going to have to come together to solve some of these information and social media problems. And I think that, you know, that to me is my concern in some ways, that the government doesn't have the innovation or perspective necessary to address our problems, rather than the government's going to somehow suppress all of our freedoms, in part because I think that it's very difficult to suppress all of our freedoms, given the fact that communication is so disaggregated at this point.
Not disaggregated enough.
Maybe it's not disaggregated enough because we have such a small number of platforms, which I know is something that some people feel very strongly about. And that's something that, to me, is a real issue, that we have these like quasi-monopolies.
Yes.
Yeah.
These public utilities.
Yeah, but they're private
acting
companies.
only in their own interest. Andrew Yang, I think if you've made it to the end of this conversation, you may not agree with everything Andrew Yang just said, but you will agree that very few people running for office are thinking as broadly as he is, and for that we're grateful.
Thanks so much, Tucker.
And congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Call us when you run again. I know you will. Name of the show is Tucker Carlson. Today, new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We'll see you every weeknight, 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.